The Stranger in the Mist by A.N.Lumby. Giles Hampton was spending a short holiday in Wales. A friend of his had recently sold his business in Liverpool and had moved to Wales. This friend, whose name was Beverley, had built himself a house in Carnarvonshire, near the Snowdon Mountains. There was an ancient church called Fawr a few hundred yards away from his house, so Beverley called his new house Fawr too. Giles was very interested in geology. He loved studying rocks and stones. Since that part of Wales is of particular interest to the geologist, Giles was very glad indeed to receive Beverley's invitation to visit him. Giles arrived at Fawr on the evening of October the 10th. The house was very modern and extremely comfortable. It stood between the mountains and the Conway Valley. A few hundred yards behind the house lay the steep, rocky mountains. The weather was fine, and for the first week of his stay, Giles went with Beverley on several short geological expeditions. They also went shooting together once or twice, and they visited neighbours in the district. But on October 18th, Beverley had business in the local market town, so Giles decided to make an all-day excursion to a place on the other side of the mountains about 10 miles away. The sky was cloudy when Giles set off, after an early breakfast. In his bag were his sandwiches, and his geological hammers, and information from Beverley's servant Parry about his route across the mountains. It was after 12 o'clock when Giles arrived and began unpacking his hammers. The sun had come out, and he was hot, tired, and uncomfortable. But he soon forgot his discomfort when he examined the many interesting rocks. It was 3:30 before he had finished. He packed his hammers and notebook away in his bag again, and started on the journey back to Fawr. By this time, the sky was cloudy again. As he walked along, light rain began to fall. Then, as he climbed higher, a thick, damp mist came down and covered everything. Soon, the mist grew thicker, and he could see only a few feet in front of him. On his earlier journey across the mountains, Giles had looked out for landmarks: a waterfall, an old tree, a small lake. He thought these would help him find his way back to Fawr. But in the mist, everything looked strange and different. Soon he crossed a stream which he did not recognize. Then he knew that he had taken the wrong path. For nearly half a mile he went back the way he had come, only to become more lost and confused than before. "This is no good," he thought. He sat down for a few moments to consider his position. The thought of a cold, uncomfortable night alone on the hillside did not particularly worry him, but he knew that Beverley would be anxious. Giles did not want to worry his friend. "He'll come out to search for me," thought Giles, "and bring the neighbours too. I can't let him organize a search party, I really can't." Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps on the hillside above him. He shouted, and a voice answered him in Welsh. From out of the mist came an old man with a huge dog by his side. Although the man was old, he stood straight and tall. He wore a heavy cloak of dark cloth that came down to his ankles. He wore no hat, and his hair was long and white. His big, red face shone with kindness. The old man spoke again in Welsh. Giles made signs to show that he did not understand. The old man smiled kindly. "I'm lost," said Giles, making more signs. "I want to go to Fablan. The old man seemed to understand. "Fablan," he repeated several times and smiled again. Then he felt inside his long cloak and pulled out a map. He spread the map out on a stone in front of him. Beverley's new house was not, of course, on the map, but the church of Fablan was clearly shown. With his thin old hand, the stranger pointed to the place on the map. He spoke again in Welsh, then pointed again. "He is telling me that we are here," said Giles to himself. And then the old man pointed out the path that Giles must take to reach Fablan. He did this 3 times to make sure that Giles understood. Then he pushed the map into Giles' hands. Giles tried to refuse this gift, but the old man only laughed and smiled. Giles thanked him warmly and pushed the map into his coat pocket. Then he set out along the path that the old man had shown him. After a few steps he turned. He saw a shape through the mist, standing and watching him. He waved his hand and set off again. The next time he turned round, the old man had disappeared. Giles walked fast. The mist had become thicker than before, but the path was a good one. From time to time he checked his route on the map. Soon the path led him down a very steep hillside. In the mist, Giles could see only a few feet ahead, so he moved very carefully. Suddenly his foot turned on a sharp stone, and he almost fell. That stone probably saved his life. It flew up from under his feet and rolled down the steep path. He heard it rolling faster and faster. Then the noise stopped. A few seconds later, Giles heard a crash as the stone hit the ground hundreds of feet below. The path had led him to the edge of a cliff. Giles picked up another stone and dropped it. Again he heard the distant crash as it fell over the cliff. He looked at the map again. There was no cliff on the route the old man had shown him. For the first time, Giles became seriously worried. He sat down miserably on a large rock, took out his pipe, and found a match to light it. "Well," he thought, "we'll just have to sit here and wait for the mist to clear." Perhaps it was an hour later when he heard a voice shouting on the hillside below. Giles shouted back loudly as he could. Slowly the shouts got nearer. He recognized the voice of Beverley's servant, Parry, who had become anxious about Giles's safety and had set out to search for him. Beverley himself had not returned from the town. Giles was extremely grateful for this. He hated to trouble his friend. Parry led Giles safely back towards the house. Giles walked slowly and quietly, thankful to be rescued, but for some reason he was unwilling to tell Parry about the stranger in the mist. He explained that he had taken the wrong path. In less than an hour he was changing his wet clothes. At dinner, too, he kept quiet about it, simply telling Beverley that he had lost his way in the mist. "I suppose I took the wrong path," he said, "and I found myself at the edge of a cliff." "You had a very lucky escape," said Beverley. "There have been some nasty accidents in these hills. A man was killed about 4 years ago. I believe he was found at the bottom of the same cliff. That was before I came here, of course." He turned to his servant. "I'm sure you remember the accident, Parry," he said. "Am I right? Was it the same place?" "It certainly was, sir," said the servant. "It was a gentleman from London. They buried him in the churchyard here. I was working for Captain Trevor at the time. He let us all go to the burial. It was all over the local newspaper, it was. I kept a copy. The Carnarvon and District News. I'll fetch it if you like, sir." "That's a good idea, Parry," said his master, and in a few minutes Parry returned with an old newspaper. Beverley read the report aloud. "Early on Wednesday morning, the body of a young man was found at the bottom of the cliff at Aldwy yr Erion. A doctor examined the body and decided the man had been dead for several hours. The unfortunate man was Mr. John Stevenson, a young lawyer from London. Mr. Stevenson had been on holiday in Wales, and he had been exploring our beautiful mountains and valleys. When he did not return to his hotel in the evening, Captain Trevor, a local man, bravely organized a search party. Unfortunately, the thick mist made their work more difficult. It appears that the dead man took the wrong path in the mist and fell over this cliff, hitting the sharp rocks below. In the dead man's pocket was a copy of a very old, out-of-date map. It showed a long, disused path over the hill. Of course, as everyone in the district knows, the path was destroyed many years ago by the great landslide. That was a terrible disaster that carried away a large part of the hillside. The sad death of Mr. Stevenson should be a warning to everyone. Never depend on an out-of-date map. A modern, more accurate map of the district is available from the offices of this newspaper. Price 9d. When Giles heard about the out-of-date map in the dead man's pocket, he was very excited. He told Beverley the whole story of the stranger in the mist. Beverley was very interested. "Do you remember anything about a map, Parry?" he asked his servant. "I certainly do, sir," said Parry. "'Twas a very old map. Mr. Roberts still has it, I believe." "Then will you please send a message to Mr. Roberts for me?" said Beverley. "Give him my best wishes, and ask him to come and have coffee with us, and ask him to bring the old man's map with him, please." Parry hurried away to carry out his master's orders. "I have the map that the old man gave me today," said Giles. "It's still in my coat pocket. I'll go get it." He fetched the map and spread it out on the table. The two men studied it carefully. In the mist, Giles had not noticed anything strange about the map, but in the brightly lit dining room, the map looked very unusual indeed. It was on thick paper that looked yellow with age. The writing was very old, with long S's that looked like F's. "Look at that," said Beverley, pointing to some writing at the bottom of the map. "Madog ap Rhys, 1707. Just then Mr. Roberts arrived. He listened very carefully to Giles's story. Then he took a map out of his pocket. It was exactly like the map that lay on the table. "I've always wondered how the dead man got that map," he said. "It's very unusual. There's only one other copy. That is in the museum at Carnarvon." "And who was Madog ap Rhys?" asked Giles. "He was a rather strange, lonely old man," said Mr. Roberts. "He lived alone on the hillside, spent most of his time praying. He died in 1720, of course that was before the landslide destroyed the path to Aldwy yr Erion. Whenever there was a mist, Madog ap Rhys walked among the hills in his long dark cloak with his dog beside him. He drew this map. He always carried a copy with him, to give to travellers who had lost their way. Some local people say his spirit still walks among the hills, searching for lost travellers, but that's only a story. I don't take it very seriously." "How sad," said Giles. after Mr. Roberts had drunk his coffee and left. Madog ap Rhys was a good, kind man. He only wanted to help. But he led poor Stevenson to his death, and he almost killed me. Domine